Jimmy Fallon was asking Jessica Martinez about balancing work and motherhood, when something in her exhausted expression suddenly crumbled. The 32-year-old single mother, who had been trying to maintain composure while discussing her daily routine, began shaking her head in defeat. "Jimmy," she said softly, her voice breaking, "I work 18 hours a day, and I still can't afford to live." The Tonight Show studio, which had been celebrating working mothers, fell into stunned silence. Jessica's confession transformed what had seemed like an inspiring story of determination into something much more desperate and heartbreaking. Jimmy's encouraging smile faded as he realized this wasn't about work-life balance. This was about survival in America. It was May 16th, and Jessica had come on the show as part of a segment honoring hard-working single mothers. The interview had started positively, with Jessica describing her determination to provide for her 6-year-old daughter Sofia. But when Jimmy asked how she managed to do it all, the facade of strength she'd been maintaining finally collapsed. "I have 3 jobs," Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cleaning offices at 4 a.m., cashier at the grocery store from noon to 6, then driving Uber until midnight." The grueling schedule she described left no room for rest, let alone motherhood. The studio fell into complete silence. Jimmy's face showed disbelief and growing concern. The audience seemed frozen, confronted with the reality that in America, working 3 jobs might not be enough to survive. "3 jobs?" Jimmy asked gently, his voice full of compassion and shock. "Jessica, when do you sleep?" His question highlighted the impossibility of her situation. "I don't," Jessica replied simply, the admission devastating in its honesty. "I get maybe 4 hours between driving my last Uber passenger and cleaning the first office." Her exhaustion was visible in every line of her face. "And when do you see Sofia?" Jimmy continued, though he seemed afraid to hear the answer. Jessica's response broke the hearts of everyone listening. "That's the worst part," she said, tears beginning to flow. "I wake her up at 3:30 a.m. to drive her to my mother's house before work." The image of a sleeping 6-year-old being transferred in the middle of the night was heartbreaking. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus on this woman who represented millions of struggling parents. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked carefully, understanding the toll this lifestyle must take. 2 years, Jessica replied, the timeline shockingly long for such an unsustainable schedule. Ever since Sofia's father stopped paying child support, the abandonment by her daughter's father had created this impossible situation. "I pick her up at 11 p.m. when I finish my grocery shift, but she's already asleep," she continued, describing the brief moments she could steal with her daughter. "On weekends, I drive Uber while she sits in the back seat, doing homework." The sacrifice of childhood normalcy was evident in every detail. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment. This wasn't just one woman's story. This was an indictment of an economic system that demanded impossible choices from working parents. The cameras captured every emotion crossing Jessica's tired face. "How much do you make from all 3 jobs?" Jimmy asked softly, understanding that the numbers would be shocking. Jessica's response revealed the cruel mathematics of poverty. "About $2,800 a month, before taxes," she said, the amount seeming substantial until broken down by hours worked. "That's less than $5 an hour when you calculate the actual time." The exploitation was mathematical and undeniable. "My rent alone is $1,400, she continued, describing the impossible housing costs. "That's half my income just for a 1-bedroom apartment." The lack of affordable housing was evident in her budget breakdown. Behind the scenes, producers were grappling with how to handle this unprecedented revelation. This wasn't entertainment, this was a working mother having a breakdown about economic injustice on live television. They recognized the importance of letting Jessica's story be heard. "What about food? Healthcare?" Jimmy asked, understanding that housing was just the beginning of her struggles. Jessica's laugh was bitter and exhausted. "We eat ramen noodles, and whatever's marked down at the grocery store," she admitted, describing the food insecurity that accompanied her housing struggles. Sofia thinks mac and cheese is a fancy dinner. The impact on her daughter's nutrition was clearly weighing on her. And we haven't been to a doctor in 2 years, she continued, revealing another impossible choice. I can't afford insurance, and I can't afford to miss work for appointments. The healthcare system's failure was evident in her circumstances. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to sit next to Jessica, abandoning the traditional interview setup. "Jessica, this is not okay," he said firmly. "No one should have to work 3 jobs and still struggle." "But this is America now," Jessica replied, looking directly at him with eyes that held too much exhaustion for someone her age. "This is what they call the American dream." Her bitter reframing of the national mythology was both accurate and heartbreaking. "Sofia asks me why I'm never home," she continued, sharing the most painful aspect of her situation. "How do you explain to a 6-year-old that mommy has to work all the time just so we can have a roof?" The impossible conversation every struggling parent faces was evident in her question. The vulnerability in her words was staggering. Jimmy reached over and gently placed his hand on her arm. "What do you tell her?" "That mommy is working hard to make life better," Jessica said, the hope in her voice painful to hear. "But honestly, I don't know if it will ever get better." Her loss of faith in the possibility of improvement was devastating. "I'm missing her childhood," she continued, describing the cruelest aspect of poverty. "She took her first steps at my mother's house because I was at work. The milestones she'd missed were irreplaceable losses. Last month, she drew a picture of our family," Jessica said, pulling out her phone to show a child's drawing. "It's just her and my mom because I'm never there." The visual representation of her absence was heartbreaking. The audience was visibly emotional now, many people crying as they recognized themselves or their struggles in Jessica's story. Her experience was creating space for confronting uncomfortable truths about work, wages, and family in modern America. "What would need to change for your life to be different?" Jimmy asked, recognizing that Jessica's situation reflected systemic rather than personal failures. Jessica considered the question with the expertise of someone living it daily. "Minimum wage needs to be a living wage," she said with conviction born from experience. $15 an hour might sound like a lot to some people, but it's barely survival. Her perspective on wage policy came from lived reality rather than theoretical economics. "And childcare," she continued, identifying another systemic barrier. "Quality childcare costs more than college tuition." The impossible economics of working parenthood were evident in every obstacle she described. "What would you say to people who think you should just work harder or get a better job?" Jimmy asked, understanding the common criticisms struggling workers face. Jessica's response was immediate and passionate. "I'm working as hard as anyone can work," she said, her voice stronger now despite her exhaustion. "I have 3 jobs, how much harder can I work?" Her challenge to bootstrap mentality was rooted in undeniable effort, and better jobs require education. "I can't afford because I'm working 3 jobs to survive," she continued, describing the trap that keeps people in poverty. "It's a cycle that's almost impossible to break." Her analysis was both personal and systemic. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't celebratory. This was recognition of struggle, appreciation for honesty, and anger at a system that demanded such sacrifices from parents. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. "What do you dream about for Sofia's future?" Jimmy asked, wanting to end on hope despite the dire circumstances. Jessica's face lit up for the first time during the interview. "That she'll never have to choose between being a good mother and paying rent," she said, her love for her daughter evident in every word. "That she'll be able to be present for her children." Her dreams were modest but profound. "I want her to remember her childhood as more than me being absent," she continued, describing hopes that seemed both reasonable and currently impossible. "I want her to know that love doesn't always mean sacrifice." Her wisdom about parenting was hard-won and valuable. They talked for a few more minutes about wages, about childcare, about the support systems that could make working parenthood sustainable rather than impossible. Jessica was more articulate and insightful than any politician who had discussed these issues on the show. When the interview ended, something remarkable happened. Viewers began calling with job offers, childcare help, and financial assistance. Within hours, a GoFundMe had raised $50,000 for Jessica's family. "I can't believe people care," Jessica told Jimmy backstage, overwhelmed by the immediate response. "I thought I was invisible." The sudden attention was as surprising as it was welcome. The episode aired exactly as it happened, with Jessica's story resonating far beyond entertainment. Labor organizations used her story to advocate for wage increases, and childcare advocates highlighted the impossible choices facing working parents. Within weeks, Jessica had received job offers that would allow her to work one full-time position instead of 3 part-time jobs. More importantly, her story had sparked national conversations about living wages and family support systems. "You gave a voice to millions of parents," Jimmy told Jessica when she returned to the show 3 months later. "Your courage to share the truth changed the conversation." Her transformation was remarkable. She looked rested for the first time in years. The Tonight Show established regular segments about economic justice and working families directly because of Jessica's appearance. They featured stories about wages, healthcare, and the policies that could make work sustainable for families. Jimmy learned something profound that May night that changed how he thought about success and struggle. "I realized that some of the hardest working people in America are also the most invisible," he reflected later. "Jessica showed me that poverty isn't about not working hard enough." Jessica Martinez's work story became more than a viral moment. It became a catalyst for conversations about living wages, affordable childcare, and the basic dignity that working parents deserve. Her exhaustion had given voice to millions of families struggling with the same impossible choices. Years later, Jessica would say that sharing her story on live television was the turning point that saved her family. "That night, I stopped being ashamed of struggling and started being proud of surviving." She reflected, "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is tell the truth about how hard life really is." The lesson of that extraordinary May night was profound. In a society that celebrates individual achievement, we often ignore the systemic barriers that make achievement impossible for so many. Sometimes the most heroic thing someone can do is simply keep going when the system is designed to make them fail.